It's so great to see you today. I'm here with Ron Cohen. Um, Ron, we'll let you introduce yourself, but past VP of Advancement at Susquehanna, and just a very experienced and thoughtful practitioner of philanthropy and philanthropic incitement. What do we call our career?
Philanthropic incitement. I like that. Getting people busy.
Welcome, Ron. How are you?
I am good. And I just started telling you, I brought this hat out for you in celebration because I think, if I'm remembering your post sequence properly, you crossed the 1 year mark of the DPP, the Donor Participation Project, in August or September or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just shared that you're not familiar with the movie Field of Dreams, which you have to see now. It's the story of the disgraced Chicago White Sox who were banned from baseball in the early 1900s. And in a fictional, wonderfully told story, a guy in Iowa hears voices that compel him to tear down a portion of his cornfield and build a baseball stadium. And he's on the verge of bankruptcy, and his family can't understand it, and the people in his town can't understand it. But the voice in his head says, if you build it, they will come. And I'm sure there are people who've seen the movie out there, but I kind of think of what you've done in a similar fashion, because I think I've read that you're over 1,000 members of practitioners in this donor participation project. And I suspect, you had thoughts at the beginning that went down the path of, okay, if I build this thing, is anybody going to show up? Are people going to talk? Yeah, exactly, Daniel Ross. You should watch it tonight. And so you are that principal, and I salute you and applaud you. And we've had some opportunity to work on a couple of projects, which has been fun. But you have sort of turned philanthropy for a lot of people back into a field of dreams. There's been some drudgery out there, especially in COVID times. And I just admire what you've done, what you've built. And, so much of it connects to what I think the larger goals of the project are. And we can talk about that as time goes on. But to you, Field of Dreams, you have built it. People have come. I'm going to take my hat off now.
Lovely. So everybody check out Ron's. Thank you, Ron. Check out Ron's website. Ron, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the work that you do with nonprofit organizations?
Sure. I work mainly with higher education organizations, but also with other nonprofits, arts and culture groups. And I guess you could say that we're fundraising consultants. And when I say we, my spouse, my wife, Jessica, is my business partner. We lead from the place of engagement. And we say, you will not build sustained support among your stakeholders, your supporters, your constituents, unless they're engaged in the work that you do. Obviously, you want them to write checks, but if all they're doing is writing checks, they're not going to last very long. And so we have tried to help organizations build capacity for engagement and then lead into better fundraising. And so that, in a nutshell, is what we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years now, based here in Ashland, Oregon. Not anywhere near Portland, for those unfamiliar with the state of Oregon. We're about 10 miles north of the California border. And we love it here, except for when the wildfires are burning and the smoke is making us put on masks for other reasons.
Oh, my goodness. So, yes, we obviously invite Ron, posts really interesting material here on LinkedIn. And I have to confess, Ron, that I took one of your posts, your suggestions, and you actually shared a template with people of like, how are we doing type message. and the response is incredible. So just
Oh,
the quality of the conversations I'm being able to have with our donors, who are already pretty exceptional at Muhlenberg College,
mhm.
but it's also how you ask, right? And that, so thank you, and I invite everybody to check Ron's profile out.
I'm glad that that's worked well, and let's talk more about that separately, because I'd like to learn what you're hearing from people.
Awesome. So, and everybody that's here on the call, please feel free to ask questions. As you've seen in the chat, we're trying to be as responsive as possible. Ron and I will be chatting about some really interesting questions that he posed in advance and that you can see in the description for today. I really liked, Ron, when you said that stewardship is dialogue, not monologue. Um, I guess that's the theory. What tends to usually happen?
So in my experience, and actually, if you'll let me back up for a minute, there's a little context I can set. So as you mentioned, I was the vice president for advancement at Susquehanna University for a long time. I think some of my former colleagues are on the call this morning. Thank you all. And I got the chance to do some research for a semester, and I built a little research project around how universities were keeping their alumni connected to the school, but not through the fundraising door, through the alumni door. And the long story short is I kept running into people, alumni directors, VPs, who would say, it just drives me nuts when our alumni say the only time you ever contact me is when you're asking for money. That seems to be when you need me. And the beauty of being away for a few months was I let that simmer a bit and kind of turned it around or extended it to understand that what people are really saying when that statement comes is the only time you ever ask me to do something is when you ask me to write a check. And so, I brought that back and talked with colleagues about what can we be asking our alumni to do that isn't asking for a check, and how do we do it in ways that that feel like we're asking in ways that will be as impactful as the checks people write, right? And so that starts from a place of value. What are we going to ask that people say, oh, I understand that. I understand why they're asking me to do this. And it may even have some value for me. And so we started doing that and seeing results. And then when you see the results, you treat them like transactions, much like you do with gift receipts and acknowledgement and so on. And so that has kind of undergirded my work over the last several years. And in terms of the stewardship or the engagement question, my sense is there are a lot of organizations still that feel like engagement is all about saying thank you. And so the more we say thank you, the more we're engaging people because we're sending them a message that lets them know how much we appreciate what they're doing. And so this is a true client story. We did some work a year and a half ago, and we asked staff in the development office of an organization how they felt they were doing in terms of acknowledgement and stewardship. And they said, we're great. We send thank yous promptly. We send them often. And I think people would say, we do a great job of that. So, of course, we had the chance to talk with donors as well, who said, they overthank me. And that's not why I do what I do. I'm doing it to create impact. I'd like to know more about the impact that I'm creating. And so to lay that message back in the hands of the staff and to say, can you think about opportunities you have for grabbing impact and using those opportunities to send information back out, that's better context for the engagement and the stewardship that I think we can do better at, across the sector in continually reminding people, this is what you're creating. This is how you're adding value. We hope you see the value in that as well.
And there's so many opportunities to do so now virtually and on video and on Zoom town halls. It doesn't have to be a huge production, right?
Exactly. And, part of it, Lewis, is it's almost deploying people in the organization, in the advancement shop, to say, okay, who are our impact filter colleagues? Who's out there on a daily basis mining the work that we do in ways that we can collect it and put it back out to the audience, the stakeholders who are investing in us, and sharing with them in ways that they see it. And, people who work in advancement offices have plenty to do. And yet, this may be critical in terms of getting that dialogue to happen, and in ways that people say, I want to keep funding this. I want to keep being a part of this.
It's funny, like you add things, but it's very hard to let things go. In a way, it feels to me like donor relations might be the new annual fund. That stewardship component needs to be important. And if you have to let something go, we'll let go of the thousands of letters and emails.
Right. And so let's pile onto that for a second. That our friend and colleague Jim Langley is a big advocate for finding out why first-time donors make gifts, right? And that is I've come to believe that may be the most important engagement opportunity that an organization has, because it's never inappropriate to try to open that door, right? If you're calling or writing or saying, hey, thank you, you're new to us. Can we work to understand that a little bit, because we'd like to know more about what drew you to us. There will be people who say, I did this for a reason that's never going to happen again. Well, okay, that's good to know. But others will say, the time was right. Here's what's happening in my life. Here's how I've reflected back on what this organization gave me, meant to me, continues to mean to me. And all of that, I think, starts to seed relationship building capacity in ways that are just there to be had. And so it was funny, you posted either yesterday, or I guess it was yesterday, here's our last opportunity to reach out and check in with donors before we get into the nitty gritty of end of year stuff. And I thought, yes. And also, can we anticipate that there are going to be a lot of new donors who cross the threshold at December 31st, or, in the next 6 or 7 weeks? And what do we want to do with them? How do we want to do better in understanding why they're coming to us in this cycle? And can we develop more systematic ways of chasing out the information?
Absolutely. So it sounds like what you're kind of saying is that a lot of the kind of really deep thinking and process about solicitation that the industry has traditionally done needs to be applied to engagement and cultivation and community building and all of that, right? So that's kind of...
Exactly. I look at what you're doing through the DPP, and when you host an event or bring that group together in the ways that you do, your main driver is adding value, right? And people are responding because they see the value that is coming out of that collective of individuals. And I suspect that if you, I don't know what it would be for, Lewis, but if you presented to that group I have found a tool that would make our community work even better, but it costs $1,000. Is anybody willing to help chip in to make that possible? You would have the $1,000 pretty quickly, because the dialogue has been more than just that. And that's kind of what I'm trying to push for in these larger relationships and engagement.
Absolutely. I love how you kind of reframe stewardship in the light of engagement. It's a much deeper thing, right? It's not just thanking people. It's not just that one way. It's really kind of should be part of the relationship.
Exactly. Yep.
That's great. Let me jump. So I'd like to welcome Curtis and Matt, and we had Daniel Ross and Kevin earlier. Thanks so much for joining today. If anybody has questions for Ron as we keep this chat going, and you'll see he's a really fantastic thinker and he's so insightful. So please don't lose the opportunity today, but feel free to put your questions in the chat. In the meantime, Ron, I'm going to jump to one of the questions you posted for us, or you posited for us, and you said, if an organization feels you are important enough to invite to an event, but you can't attend, aren't you important enough to receive a "here's what you missed" message in follow-up? Where's this coming from? I guess you feel that this doesn't happen, right? Yeah.
I do, and maybe it's changing. Maybe there are folks on the call who are actually doing a better job of this than I think I was doing when I was, sitting in my chair at Susquehanna. But I had a conversation. I've had a couple of conversations with other thought leaders who have said, if you're going to go to the trouble of inviting 5,000 people to an event, and that only in a physical event, let's pre-COVID, and 50 people show up, what are you doing with the other 4,950 because they missed something, right? And was what they missed worth reporting back and sharing because you're trying to advance relationships for that whole invitation pool? And really what I chase it back to, Lewis, is are we thinking far enough in advance about what the goal of the event, be it live or virtual, is? What are we setting out to achieve? And I would say most organizations should be able to write the "here's what you missed" story before the event even happens, because they've framed it that way. They've figured out what the value is that they're going to try to create, and ideally do some dialogic exchange in the live environment. But for everybody who can't be there, how do they benefit? What's to be done and it's about thinking the best of people, right? Not thinking the worst. It's not that they didn't come because they hate you. They didn't come because they're living their lives and they've got a whole bunch of things going on. And so let's give the benefit of the doubt and ask ourselves, what can we do to supplement? Because if we do it well, maybe they'll come to the next one, or maybe they'll tune into the next one. And we want them to continue to be interested in what we're doing.
This is so interesting. And you have a comment from Al in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Al, good morning. Well, good afternoon where you are.
So I love that you brought this up, because it brought two further questions to my mind. One is, do you see the challenge as being more strategic or more operational? And I guess, you're going to say both are linked, etc. From my perspective, a lot of what happens is shops are struggling. They just can't get to it, and they do the events. Whatever's left of them after that is just on to the next thing, right? And it's maybe a lack of knowing how to work the technology, or to combine all the different technologies they use, or a combination of factors, right? I guess that's my first question. Kind of, is that more of the strategy or the tactics that you think are suffering here?
So you answered your question. It's both, but it's maybe both in a way that is different. than what people might think. So let's say there's an event that is being considered, and a group of people on a staff who are charged with putting it together. Who in the group is asking the question, why are we doing this? What goals are we looking to achieve? And how will we report out what we do? Where's the value that we're going to send along? And I see Deborah's comment here that is exactly, you're right. You pick up what you did, and there may be calls to action that get planted in events that you want the non-attendees to see, right? So, in a let's say in a higher ed or a prep school context, a message coming from the speaker, the main person is, we'd like to know if you come across prospective students who you think would be a good match for us. That's an easy question to ask all those people who didn't attend afterwards, right? But what's the right strategic question? The tacticians don't have to come up with it, but they should push that right up to the decision makers and make it so that they're getting a clear response so that they then know what to do in the follow-up part.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next follow-up question is related to the impact of doing, what is the impact of being a good person? Right? But it's kind of like, it's in our metric-driven, obsessed culture, it's hard to say, well, doing that resulted in this other thing, which I guess ultimately led to gifts. How do you justify this? Or is this a thing that just doesn't need justification? You just, need to do it because it's the right thing to do.
Bingo. I mean, we're dealing with human beings, and this is what happens in all aspects of our lives. And if we're only using those moments to cherry pick with fundraising as the end goal, I just think we're missing larger opportunities to hear what people have to say, understand what else they can contribute to the mix, and generally keep them talking with us because we don't want to lose them.
Absolutely. So for folks who are on the call today, what follow-up methodologies, strategies, questions have you applied to your events, and what have you seen come out of those? So I read, Ron, I'm going to share an idea for your feedback here. I read about something called dark social, as in marketers talk about how you do the right things on social media. You have your CEO being, a thought leader, et cetera, and then you get results. It's just you can't measure them, right? It's word of mouth. It's people building trust. Is this like dark? We call it dark fundraising, right? You're doing the right things and it ends up in gifts.
I guess I would take it from let's talk about maybe the data side, okay? Because I know there can be a tendency to have the first question be, well, we're going to be asking for a lot of information. And what are we going to do with it? Where are we going to put it? How are we going to use it? All good questions, and hopefully questions that involve the data management colleagues from the beginning, because they then have a seat at the table and a voice in the conversation in ways that can help sort through that. But let's even think of it in a binary sense, Louis. If we'll go back to the 5,000 invitation event, and I send something out to the 4,950 people that asks a question, some of them will respond. I want to know who the responders are, right? Simple as that, binary, one, they responded. Well, if that's your MO over time, you're going to accrue a lot of people who are responding to the questions that you're asking, and it will form a pyramid that I think has some translation to fundraising, but should open lots of conversation opportunities.
Absolutely. There's a question from Matt. what are some key points you make with students or student athletes before interaction with donors or alums to ensure they make the event meaningful to them? What are your thoughts on that, Ron?
Hello, Matthew. I would try to help students understand who it is that they're going to be in front of or with. And when it's alumni, one of the things I like to say to students is, these are people who walked into your shoes. They did the same things that you are doing now, and so you have a connection. These are not cold, uninterested people. And that typically helps. The other thing that helps is to say, these are people who are busy. They have a lot going on in their lives, and yet they're making time to be available to you. And so honor that and respect that. And then 3, come prepared, because they want to help. And the way that they can help the best is if you've thought about questions that you're prepared to ask when you meet them. So don't walk into a room or get onto a call with, the Hollywood Squares boxes where you haven't done a little bit of homework to understand who's in the room with you, and to know there's a question that you have that you're going to ask either one alum or several, but that's your mission in being connected. And I think most students find that that's helpful guidance, and they need guidance. They don't know what they're walking into. And if you can do a little bit of prep work with alumni on the other side to say, hey, we've told them that you're not going to be evil or mean. And in fact, you're about the friendliest audience that they're going to have. Protocols help. Protocols matter. Everybody appreciates a little bit of guidance. And then, the final thing, Matt, is anybody you make contact with, you thank, whether it's an email message or a call or whatever. That kind of seals the start of a relationship, and who knows where it goes from there.
So Adam Platzer from RIT has this wonderful saying that is, shock them with your follow-up. And I've stolen that for our team too, right? But it's kind of the same principle.
Yep, exactly.
That's so good. Ron, I'm going to ask you a horrible question that I hope none of your clients ever ask of you. I'm half joking, but have you seen, so once you start being a good person institutionally, right? So once you start implementing these kind of common sense, but not always, these practices of really thanking people, of involving people in a conversation, of bringing people in, how long does that take to have an effect on maybe the fundraising, or like how long before you start to kind of see it? And I guess the inverse to that is kind of the gratitude that we should have to know that whatever goodwill we are seeing now in our current roles as fundraisers is the accrued goodwill of many generations that went before us.
Correct. Yeah. It's a good question, Louis, and I don't have data to support an answer, but what I would say is the more different kinds of conversations that you're having, the more palatable it makes the fundraising request, right? So if every communication from the organization has to do with money, that grows old. People stop reading the email, or they don't open the envelope, or whatever it is. But the more varied the subject matter, the more curious you can be institutionally, being a good institution, the better it is, and I think more effective it makes the fundraising, because it kind of turns the fundraising into part of citizenship, right? Part of the community. It's like, this is, we have these conversations, and but also part of what the organization is about is financial support, and we hope that you'll consider participating in that way as well. That's less onerous than will you make a gift? Will you please make a gift? Hi, did you get the last message where I asked you to make a gift? And so that's where I actually think having more conversations lets you ask more. I know you and I had an exchange about this not that long ago, and that you have found that, you know, organizations that get told or receive feedback that you're asking too much kind of stop, they retreat, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because you know, a lot of times a lot of messages need to get through in order for the one that finally penetrates. But if you widen the discussion, you can keep asking in the same sort of volume as you had been. It's just you've got other things happening that are trying to get people and keep people connected.
Well, you know, and at least the solicitation is some type of communication, right? Maybe you
It is.
for some value, even though
It
it seems
is.
to me, Ron, that people are, and maybe this is just a personal perception, but people are kind of reacting more negatively to the request. I don't know if it's the zeitgeist, but they, you know, what we usually would say, well, as a fundraiser, you know, you understand that we're a nonprofit, and we ask people. That's kind of what we do. But they, you know, they react as if it were something aggressive. Has this always been the case? You know, is it a matter of how you ask? Do you feel that in general society is moving toward perceiving these philanthropic asks as more intrusive than before?
Well, the volume in general has gone up. And I think what's changed over the long arc of time is, you know, loyalty is not blind. And you have to earn the trust. And you do that by asking questions all the time. And there are organizations that, you know, it goes back to the conversation earlier having to do with, are we taking the time to understand who our first-time donors are? That's the opportunity to know, okay, they're interested in this particular thing or this set of things. And now how do we think about asking in a fashion that matches up with that, because it corresponds with their values, their beliefs, what's important to them. And it works away from the general. And I think there are still lots of requests that go out there. I mean, I admire people like you, and I saw Allison's name pop in earlier, annual fund directors and leaders for whom, you know, the case to be made is everything. You know, everything we're doing is important, and your gift will help advance it all. There was a time when that actually worked, right? It just doesn't work very well anymore, because people, while they have a larger interest in the organization, they have a funding interest in a particular aspect of the organization. And so, you know, they're looking for evidence that you've heard them, you realize that, and so you're asking down a channel that they can say, okay, I understand why this request is coming to me.
Yeah, in a way, I see that as a consequence of the decline in trust. So I don't really trust you so much. I still feel strongly about your mission. I'm trying to find a way to be philanthropic with you. You know, can I focus on this, or can you tell me more about this specifically? Kevin had a good question, and not all of it is showing. I'll try to read it. He says, the question of post-event communication follow-up strategy makes me think the follow-ups can only be as good as the event allows you to be. If the event is very one-sided, like basically sitting through a presentation, that is no different than sitting through a play or a movie or a concert, how is that event really teeing up a reasonable chance at meaningful follow-ups? That's a great comment, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's spot on, Kevin, and it gets to, you know, back to the notion of what is the event setting out to do? And, you know, most people come to events, especially the kinds that nonprofit organizations will put on, to be participants. It's much more enjoyable when you're a participant than if you're only there as a spectator. And so if what you're doing is built on a foundation of trying to create dialogue or otherwise engage participants, attendees, you've got more to share out. You may not know exactly what you're going to share out because you're waiting for that cauldron that you've set up to actually bubble and brew based on what participants offer. And then you've got the chance for even richer outreach and follow-up. These are the sorts of things that we started to hear from people who attended the event. We'd like to hear more from you who weren't able to attend, but who may have additional thoughts that would be valuable in advancing the conversation. So yeah, spot on.
And that is where you were, that strategy piece that, if this is part of your strategy, you envision events differently. And you can do so many things digitally now, right? I'm seeing events that have a chat room going on during the event, and then afterwards, well, kind of like LinkedIn, right? Which is what makes it so powerful.
Exactly.
It's so great. There's a good comment from Jay. He says, in 1999, remember those days? The biggest growth in annual support for higher ed was restricted giving. For over 20 years, people have been passionate about what they are passionate about. We're not
exactly, Jay. And so I don't know if there's a question in there, but I would jump onto it and say, every donor, whether they're giving 7 figures or 2 figures, wants to know that they're supporting something important, right? And so at the high end, there is always focus. Nobody is showing up and saying, Louis, we're here to ask you for $1 million, period, right? But at the other end, a lot of organizations are saying, we're asking you for $50 or we're asking you for $100, period. You know what we do, fill in the blanks the way you'd like to, and that just feels less and less good. And so I think it's added pressure to how you make the $50 or $100 or $250 gift feel meaningful and connect in a values-based way with donors.
Yeah. And, I kind of have a counter to that, which of course, you're asking me, right? But let's get some conversation going. Which is that if you look at the experience of this major donor, they are experiencing that engagement that you spoke about earlier, that dialogue. They are in touch with the leadership. They meet in committees, advisory boards, trustees, they have a really good sense of what their impact is. And if not, they feel empowered to ask, and they see it every day. Whereas all of that is mostly missing for the $50 donor. They're just expected to give, and I hate to say it, but kind of to shut up. And I think technology has made a lot of opportunities to provide a version of this to a lot more people. I think we're missing out on that.
So let me try an example out on you.
Please.
For the higher ed folks on the call, some of you may read Inside Higher Ed, the daily piece with headlines and some content on what's going on in higher education. And today was a good example. There's a piece toward the middle of each issue, and sometimes that middle, it's very brief. And today's said, new programs, data science, and it lists 5 or 6 things. And so if you click on it, you see which organizations have started new programs. So my thought is, well, I start wondering, well, how did they get to that place of developing the new program? And then did they think about or engage people in their universe who have experience and expertise, like alumni, like parents, like donors, who might be responsive in ways that help shape the best program possible? Everything's an opportunity in that way. It's not necessarily, a fundraising request, but again, it's a reason to look at your community and say, where's the value in here? Where could it be? How do we ask? How do we extract? And then how do we build from it?
Absolutely. That's a really good insight. Al has another comment. He says, in my experience, building meaningful and deep relationships, particularly around stewardship, requires partners throughout the organization. A little bit like what you were saying, Ron. Many of these partners are outside of the advancement division. Therefore, we need to help them understand the important role they play in our work and in the overall vitality of the organization. Can you do good stewardship in a void?
Thank you, Al. You can't. And it's so from the stewardship perspective, and I think from the engagement perspective, that's where it gets tricky and challenging because you do need partners in order to execute well. Fundraising priorities tend to be top down. Leadership says, here's what's important. Here's what we need to go raise money for and find investors. Development, annual giving, go out and do it. Stewarding those relationships requires the expertise to then be at the forefront, right? Nobody's going to feel good. Well, I shouldn't say that. When the subject matter experts are involved, it kind of it creates the opportunity for the conversation to go wider and broader than the gift, right? So somebody has been willing to invest. They're not investing blindly. They're investing in something that they believe in. And so let's do what we can do to create that relationship capital in that space, because I suspect, well, I know, Al, this has been the case for you. The more relationships there are with a donor, the better the overall relationship is going to be because the load gets spread. And then so the question I think that's embedded in there is, how do you create the space and the capacity for those partners to be involved, to be engaged? And it's hard work. My experience has been that it's best to not go at it in a whole cloth sort of way, right? Asking 100 people or saying, we need your help to execute this piece of our work is not going to get 100 positive responses. I found it more successful. I've had more success going to the one or the two or the three that I know have an interest, have some capacity, are willing to partner and start things. And they then become ambassadors with others in ways that builds that core of stewards or that core of engagers in ways that's most effective.
Thanks so much, Ron. I believe you had one or maybe even two thought experiments, which is I feel kind of like Einstein, right? When he was imagining himself in a light proton or whatever that is. So would you like to share one of them with the audience today? And everybody who's on the call, please feel free to comment, ask additional questions, just connect with us.
I will. You say Einstein, I might say Frankenstein. We'll see where it goes. But yeah, so for folks who are on, I would appreciate some feedback, because I started to play around with an idea that is story-based, it's narrative-based, and it's meant to illustrate the paths of a relationship that are possible with a donor. And I'm going to read you kind of what I've set up, and then I'll explain it a bit. And whether we do this here or you want to send me comments separately, I'd love that. But this is the story of Eve. She is 28. She inherited a great deal of money upon the passing of her grandmother. Her grandmother's wish, expressed in the will, but also in many chats with Eve over the years, was this: do good in the world, help your neighbor, be kind. Eve works as an accountant, earning about $80,000 a year. She inherited 200 times that, $16 million, which after taxes worked out to be a bit less, but still a lot. But she wasn't sure exactly how to go about fulfilling her grandmother's wish. She read that a number of community regional nonprofit organizations were going to gather for an information sharing forum, and she decided that would be a good place to learn. So she goes and she's intrigued by 5 organizations whose leaders she meets at this forum. And she decides to send each organization a small gift. And then what happens next evolves differently in each of the 5 scenarios that I've built over a 5-year period. And as you might imagine, she learns a lot. And I shared with Lewis a couple of the scenarios where, for example, Eve sends this small gift. And from one of the organizations, she gets a call within 24 hours from the executive director. From another, she gets a thank you email message from the executive director within a week. And then things start to happen that build the dynamic between Eve and the organization. And I would like to think there's a way to share out the storylines, but I'm not sure how best to do it, and I'm a little stuck. So I don't know if what I described makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm happy to answer questions there as well, but all thoughts welcome.
I'm really intrigued, Ron. So do the small differences in what we kind of judge as better stewardship at the beginning, do they increase over time? Is that kind of like the really small advantage that at the end means a totally different outcome?
It's all over the map, Lewis, and
Okay.
I've done it intentionally. So in some cases, there are turnover in personnel. There's turnover in personnel that becomes an issue. In others, there are unexpected relationships that develop, and then how the organization chooses to have those individuals be involved determines how the relationship with Eve develops. And I've tried to, be really kind of wide in the thinking and the considerations. And you can imagine some of the oops moments, some of the aha surprise moments. I mean, in what I just read you, there's another scenario where Eve gets a response from I think the development director, who says, "Hey, this is great. Do you know we have a monthly giving plan? Is that something that would interest you? And if so, here's how that works." And she makes another gift. Okay, so lots of opportunity there.
It sounds like it could benefit kind of from a storyboard approach, right? Kind of like a comic or something. So if anybody here has artistic talent, please reach out to Ron, especially if you'd like to partner with him. So throwing this out there. Hope it's okay.
Thank you for the sharing opportunity.
Lovely. You had shared another really fun question, and I'll bring that up now, which was, imagine nonprofit organizations had a surprise and delight function. Who would want to work there? What would happen? Would it be as magical as we think? Would it be kind of the Disney of the organization?
Well, and you alluded to it a little earlier in, I forget the name of the colleague you credited the shock them with your thank you, with your follow-up, exactly. And so that's a part of it. And So I don't know exactly what it would look like, but let me give you a couple of examples that I think are maybe the seed corn of what might happen.
Please.
An actual COVID client story. We're working with a university client, and this past summer, reunion programming was coming, and a 50th reunion, which typically, when it brought members of that class together at the campus, members of the class would receive a lovely gift box with all sorts of interesting memorabilia and items, and a nice tribute for the 50th.
Mm-hmm.
And so the staff decided we're going to send those boxes to members of the class in advance. Just going to put them in the mail. And talk about shock and awe or surprise and delight. Nobody had any idea it was coming. They covered everybody in the class at the same time, which doesn't happen when you have the people who are at the event getting theirs, and then you got to figure out afterwards, well, how are we going to get these boxes to the people who didn't come? And the response, the feedback that they got was tremendous. And so my advice to them was, keep doing that. Doesn't matter if they come back to campus, because now you've created another piece of value for them. They don't have to figure out how they're going to schlep that box back to wherever they're going when they go home. They've already got it at home. So that was a good surprise and delight moment for them.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, I'm guessing everybody on this call has made mistakes with donors over time, either single donors or large groups of donors. I will never forget the year that we printed a calendar at Susquehanna that I think we gave September 31 days. So all of a sudden we're the masters of time and space. But you make mistakes, and if you can come up with a "we goofed" package, or something that lets you acknowledge in a yep, we messed up, but that wasn't our intent, and we value you, and it arrives in a way that takes people by surprise. My experience is you end up in a good place with most people who you say, yeah, we did that. We had a problem there. And then the other one that just kind of floored me, when I was doing my research, I met with a Susquehanna graduate who worked for JP Morgan Chase in the credit card division. And so we were talking about value and keeping people connected and engaged. And he just stopped and he said, "Ron, you're not going to believe this." I said, "Okay." He said, "So we have card members who, I forget what they called them, but they put a minimum of $25,000 a month on their credit card. Okay. Every year, we send them a $10 Starbucks card, thanking them for their business. And the response we get when we do that is like we've mailed people a gold brick. They just don't see it coming. It's, it's nothing. And yet the message is, we're thinking about you. We want to keep you connected. We hope you appreciate this." And they do. So, there's a theme in there that is rise above, go beyond, and the rewards come back.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you, Ron. And I think we're nearing the top of the hour, and I know everybody here is really busy today.
Yep.
This has been fantastic. I invite everybody to connect with Ron on LinkedIn. He has really good insights and even templates that he shares from time to time. So thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom.
Hey, Louis, thank you. And thanks for all the great work you're doing. Continued good luck with the DPP, and have a good end of year.
To everybody, right?
To everybody, exactly.
Please, let's keep the stress low.
All right.
Bye, everybody.